Hello everyone, how are you guys doing? In this video, we're going to compare the Digitakt with the Octatrack, beyond the spec sheet, what it feels like to actually use these machines. In this series of videos, what I'm trying to do is see how the machine that I'm using actually influences the final musical product of what I end up doing. I wanted to compare two machines that have the same philosophy, using the same audio samples, and seeing what comes out on the other end. And it's pretty interesting that they actually do matter. So without further ado, here goes episode 2 of Sampler Wars. Welcome to the Midlife Synthesis. If you like dollars jamming, if you like talking about gear, if you have a gas addiction, you've come to the right place. So don't forget to click that like button and consider subscribing so you don't miss out on my next video. Chances are, if you click this title, you already have an idea of what you're looking for, and you're having a hard time deciding between the Digitakt and the Octatrack. Now rest assured, whatever choice you make, both of these machines are completely awesome. Now the Digitakt tends to be a lot more focused, and it's a bit easier to get your head around. So if it's your first time really getting into the Elektron world, it's a pretty good place to start. So the Digitakt is publicized by Elektron as a drum machine with some sampler capabilities. Now I would respectfully disagree. That's like saying a Ferrari is just a car. Yes, it is a drum machine, but it's a lot more than that. And what's really curious is that sometimes it gets compared to other machines that are way beyond the scope of what the Digitakt, I think, was originally meant to do. And that just speaks volumes as to how useful this machine really is. You get the Elektron sequencer, you get 8 MIDI tracks, and you get 8 audio tracks. Now 8 audio tracks might sound a bit limited, but the truth is, with the Elektron sequencer, you can really open up this thing to a lot more than that. For me, one of the best things of the Digitakt is its sampler. The sampler really makes it alive, it makes it breathe. The Digitakt is extremely musical in its pitch shifting. So when you grab an audio sample and use it musically, you really get some amazing results. If you want to see examples of the pitch shifting used musically, then please check out my Instagram and other videos on this channel. The other thing that's really good about the Digitakt is the filter. I know it's a digital filter, but I would swear it's analog. Please don't kill me on this, but the filter just sounds so rich. It sounds very organic. It has a few effects. It has a reverb, it has a delay, you can use a bit crusher and overdrive. And yeah, sure, that's not a huge palette of effects, but the thing is, the quality of those effects make it stand out. The reverb and the delay actually sound amazing, and they sound huge. The Digitakt is extremely focused, and that comes at the cost of being limited. You might not get as many options as on, for example, the Octatrack, but that also makes you focus more on just making the music and not get into option paralysis. On paper, you might think that the Elektron machines can get pretty limited because they only have 4 pages with 16 steps each. This goes for the Octatrack and for the Digitakt. But the beauty of Elektron is they have these parameter locks and conditional trigs. And what that means is that if you wanted to, each one of those steps will never repeat itself in the same way each time the pattern goes around. So that means you could have these long sequences, absolutely random and auto-generating new patterns as they go along. And you could actually use these as a way of selecting afterwards the patterns that you most enjoyed out of the randomness that generated them in the first place. A final thought on the Digitakt and the Octatrack is that you have the option of using this amazing Elektron sequencer on external gear. The Digitakt uses USB, but the Octatrack has to have 5-pin MIDI, and I would suggest that you at least have one Elektron machine in your arsenal, because it really opens up the musical territory. Now, nothing is perfect, and the Digitakt also has a few cons. The first con that everybody seems to mention, and a lot of people get stuck on, is that it's mono sampling. That means that even though the Digitakt has stereo inputs, if you sample stereo, it will squash this sample into a mono sample. So you lose the stereo field image. So unless it's really important to you that that stereo sample stays stereo, this might not be a big issue, mostly because of the effects. As I said before, the effects on the Digitakt are huge, and they sound really open and wide. So if you have a mono sample, but you add these stereo effects, I usually don't notice the difference. Problem solved. If you have a stereo sample and it's really important for you to not lose that stereo field image, then yeah, you have to use something else, like for example the Octatrack. One of my biggest worries with the Digitakt is that it doesn't have expandable memory and that it only has 64 megabytes of RAM. That means that you can store up to 1 gigabyte of sounds in total in that hard disk, but you can only use 64 megabytes of sounds loaded onto one project at a time. Being used to the MPC, which has 2 gigabytes of RAM, I thought this was going to be a problem. In use, I've never actually come across the problem of not having enough memory to keep on loading my sounds. Now, this will affect you if you want to load a whole backing track. For example, if you wanted to load a backing track into each one of the audio tracks, you might run into space issues, especially considering that if your audio file is in really good quality and the song is pretty long, you might actually get to that limit pretty quickly. So As a backing track machine, I would not recommend the Digitakt at all. One of the things that would be awesome if Elektron would give it to us in a firmware update, but I'm not sure if technically they can, would be polyphony when playing chromatically. Now, what I mean by this is that if you have an audio sample and you use the chromatic mode, you can, either with the keyboard of the Digitakt or with an external keyboard, then you can play the sample chromatically, and that yields some beautiful musical results. Now, the problem is, if you want to do chords, you can't. You can only have a mono. Now, there are a few workarounds, and there's one workaround that I use that is pretty good, but you have to be tethered to a computer to do it. That way you can have as much polyphony as you want, up to the 8 audio tracks. Now, the problem with that is that each time that you use another audio track to increase your polyphony, you're basically losing that audio track. In simpler terms, if you want to do a C major, you're going to use 3 audio tracks to do those 3 notes, and that leaves you with 5 tracks on the other side, which is very limiting already. So another con on the Digitakt is that you have no slicing. In this case, you only have that one sample. You can edit it and you can choose the loop point, but you can't slice it. Well, if you did slice it, then that would make it an Octatrack. Once again, on the aspects that maybe they didn't include in the Digitakt as a strategic thing, not to, invalidate the Octatrack, is time stretching. You can't do time stretching on the Digitakt. That means that if you lower the pitch on the audio sample, it's gonna get really long. And if the pitch goes higher, the sample gets really short. That sometimes works and sometimes it doesn't. In the case of the Digitakt, time stretching would be awesome, even more than on the Octatrack, because on the Octatrack you only have 1 octave up or down in which you can move the pitch. On the Digitakt, you get 2 octaves up and 2 octaves down, and if you could time stretch it, it would give Ableton some serious run for their money. And finally, a few things that I absolutely love on the Digitakt. First, the Control All feature. That means that if you hit the track button and you start twisting knobs, that's going to affect all the tracks on your pattern, and that just leads to some amazingly happy accidents. One of the things that I think I can't live without anymore is that on the Digitakt, you can either mute the tracks globally, which means that if you mute the track, it'll be muted on any pattern that you play, or you can mute the track per pattern. And that means that you can set up different patterns to automatically mute and unmute audio tracks. And from a performance standpoint, that just opens up a lot of possibilities. The Digitakt doesn't have an arranger mode or a song mode per se, but at least for my purposes, this pretty much fixes it. Sure, you have to go switching up the patterns by yourself, but you don't have to be muting each time that you change the pattern, and that makes it really fun to use. Last but not least, reload pattern. The Digitakt has this awesome feature that you can start tweaking out all the parameters on your page, and then you can quickly go back just by hitting reload pattern. Now, why is that important? Because in a live situation, you can start tweaking, closing up the filter, pitch shifting, give it more delay, more reverb, and then you switch up an LFO and it all goes to hell. Now, in another machine, you're done for. Your performance is not going anywhere. On the Digitakt, however, what you can do is you hit the reload button and then suddenly, bam, 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 you're back on track and everything sounds exactly the same as when you last saved the project. As a live performer, that kind of gives you a lot of freedom to just really mess your track up, knowing that you can always go back. One of the things that I find more difficult on the Digitakt is to not get swept up and be carried away by the Digitakt's temptations. And it really guides you, it really pushes you in another direction than maybe what you were trying to do in the first place. So here I try to rein it in and, try to do the song the way that I originally wanted to. I'm not sure if it worked out that much, but here goes. I hope you enjoy it. What is an Octatrack? It's a looper, a sampler, a sequencer, an effects pedal, a mixer, a MIDI controller, a sample slicer, an LFO designer, a DJ style fader, and I'm pretty sure there's a setting where you can make toast on it or something. So real quickly, what are the main things that I think make the Octatrack stand out? First of all, the looper. Having a looper just integrated into the machine and properly integrated is a huge thing. For the people that own MPCs, you'll know that you have a looper, but it's this thing that works outside of your regular workflow. So it's not very integrated really into what you're doing. In that sense, the Octatrack competes with Ableton Push. You can have a track just flowing and you can set up a looper. And what's cool about this is that when you use the looper on the Octatrack, it will actually adjust the tempo of the whole track to the thing that you just looped. As a live looper, that is really comforting because you know that all the other tracks will just magically get time shifted so that the tempo stays the same. Another thing that's pretty much unrivaled on the Octatrack, and one of the reasons why it's so mythical at this point, it's because of its audio mangling capabilities in a live performance situation. Each time you play with it, it'll be something new. And you can't say that about most machines. And that's one of the things I personally love about the Octatrack. A few things that the Octatrack has that are way more powerful than the Digitakt are, first of all, 3 LFOs versus 1 on the Digitakt. You can actually design the LFO that you want. You have stereo sampling, multiple ins and outs, and one of the things that can be very important for a live performer is that you can actually stream audio directly from the disc. Now, if you want to have a backing track for your band, you're going to need more memory than the 64 megabytes that you had on the Digitakt. So the beauty on the Octatrack is that you don't have to worry about your memory running out. And another thing is that you can back up your work pretty easily and have another card at home just in case anything happens to your Octatrack. You just plug it into your new Octatrack and bam, you're back. Okay, so one thing that is kind of a pro and a con to me are the effects of the Octatrack. Now, what do I mean by that? Yes, you have multiple effects, right? But you can't use them all at the same time. Now, for people who are familiar with the Eventide H9 guitar effects pedal, you know what I'm talking about. You have a multi-effects pedal, but you can only use one at a time. On the Octatrack, it's kind of similar. On each track, you can use up to 2 effects. So you have a lot of effects on the Octatrack, but you can't use them all at once. Now, a workaround that the Octatrack has for this is that you can assign another track below the track you're using to be only an effects chain. And that means that instead of being another audio track, this will grab the audio coming from the track before it and apply 2 more effects. So since you have 4 tracks on the same line, you could have up to 8 effects stacked up, each on top of each other. That's pretty impressive. And also when you consider that you can tweak these with the crossfader and assign them to scenes on different settings, that just opens up a world of possibilities. Now, if you ask me, the effects haven't aged that well. To me, they're like the most telltale sign that this is a 10-year-old machine. Now, that doesn't make them useless, especially since you can use the crossfader and that makes them more interesting. But I wouldn't use them as my main effects chain. Now, another thing that the Octatrack can do that actually solves the effects problem is that with the Q outs, you can actually create an external effect chain. So if you have a lot of guitar pedals at home, you can actually use them with the Octatrack and boom, problem solved. Now, the slicing itself is really good. It's really fast, it's intuitive, the screen is crisp and it's bright and it's very detailed. So you can really slice up a sample in no time with this thing, especially once your muscle memory kicks in. Now, the main gripe that I have with the slicer is that if you slice up a sample and there's just one slice that you want to change the pitch a bit, if you start pitch shifting it, it's going to affect all of the slices. Maybe it's because I was coming from the OP1 where whatever pitch shift you do to that slice is only going to affect that slice. Now on this, there are workarounds. You could save that slice to another audio file and just tweak that one. Now the problem with that is you'd have to use a whole other audio track just to play that slice, and that just seems a little wasteful for me. Another thing I wish I could do on the Octatrack is play the samples chromatically on a keyboard. When you hook up a MIDI keyboard to the Octatrack, when you start playing the keyboard, you're going to trigger the different audio tracks, and that's a shame. I really wish I could just play it chromatically like I do on the Digitakt, but can't have everything in life, can you? Now, this wouldn't be an Octatrack video if I didn't mention the learning curve, right? Yeah, the Octatrack is a pretty complicated machine, but I'm not sure if it's as complicated as some people want you to think it is. That's not to say that you don't have to study it. Actually, you do have to study a lot of it. The thing is, I think our generation is more used to not reading the manuals. Now, with the Octatrack, I think there's no way around it. You have to read the manual. It's all there. What they usually say about the Octatrack is that it has a very steep learning curve. I don't think that's the case. I think it's more of a long learning curve than a steep one. This machine is very deep and it has lots of possibilities, and that goes hand in hand with being a little more complicated and a little more difficult to get around. Now, one piece of advice that I got from another Octatrack owner is don't try to do everything all at once. Now, remember when you were in school and you had math and you had history lessons and you had PE? You didn't have them all at once, did you? That doesn't work that way. So what I would suggest to any new Octatrack owner is try not to do everything at once. Sit down with it with an objective. Today, I'm just going to use this as a looper. Or tomorrow, for example, you're going to use a flex machine, but you're going to focus just on that. And that makes it a lot easier to learn. This is like any other instrument. You have to give it time and consistency if you're going to learn how to use it. And the payoff is, if you've seen some of the stuff that you can do on this, it's definitely worth it. Another resource that really helped me out when I was learning the Octatrack was a series of video tutorials made by Fabius Beck, and you can find them in the link down below on macprovideo.com. I usually don't recommend paid tutorials to learn how to use synths, but in this case it was actually worth it. Now before we get into the actual tracks, I just want to make a quick comment about audio quality. The Digitakt samples in mono 16-bit 48 kHz, whereas the Octatrack samples in 16 or 24-bit 44.1 kHz. Now normally these kinds of technical differences don't make that much of a difference. Like when you see these videos comparing 720p with 180p or 4K, and you're looking at it on YouTube on a cell phone, it actually doesn't make that much difference. They kind of look the same. In this case though, it actually does make a huge difference, especially since you're mangling the audio that you're working with. For those of you who know photography, it's like the difference between using a RAW file and a JPEG file when you're coloring and photoshopping an image. Quick story, I had the Digitakt like a year before I had the Octatrack, and when I just got the Octatrack, I hated the way it sounded. Now you can imagine I was going crazy. I mean, I bought this thing that was like double the price of the Digitakt, and it sounded worse. I couldn't make much sense of it. But going into forums, some people suggested changing the sampling rate from 16 to 24-bit, and that made the whole difference. So I would really suggest, if you want to really take advantage of the audio mangling capabilities of the Octatrack and not get it all grainy and gnarly, go for the 24-bit. It'll be a bit more limited on the RAM space, but believe me, it's worth it. Okay, so when I was making the track on the Octatrack, I didn't want it to be that glitchy, and also I didn't want it to be that similar to the one that I made on the Digitakt. So when I started out making this track, it actually turned out to be like a generative ambient kind of thing. Then I added the drums and started playing around with the scenes, and that's when things usually get crazy with the Octatrack. So here's a small sample of what the Octatrack can do. I hope you enjoy it. So there we have it. Which Elektron machine do you think won this round? Let me know in the comments below what you think are the greatest pros and cons of these machines. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. Here's hoping to see you in the next video.